Everyone says the Dutch economy collapsed over flowers. The actual records tell a completely different story. Here's what most people believe happened. In 1637, Dutch merchants went insane. They paid fortunes for tulip bulbs, the market crashed, the economy tanked, families lost everything. It's the textbook example of irrational greed destroying a nation, except almost none of that is true. The real story is far more interesting and far more complex. Let's start with a basic question. Why did tulips cost anything at all in Holland during the 1630s? The answer sits in biology, not madness. Tulips arrived in Europe from the Ottoman Empire in the 1500s. They were exotic, they were rare, and most importantly, some bulbs produced striped or flame-patterned petals, colors that seemed to appear randomly, unpredictably. No gardener could control it. In Holland, a nation that had just become wealthy from trade and was obsessed with gardening, tulips became status symbols. Owning a rare striped variety meant something. It meant you had money, taste, and access to something most people couldn't get. So merchants and wealthy collectors paid premium prices for bulbs. That's not irrational. That's how luxury markets have always worked. But here's where the story gets tricky. By the 1630s, a secondary market developed. Bulbs were expensive and took years to mature and bloom, so traders started buying and selling bulbs before they were even planted, contracts on future flowers, essentially. These contracts changed hands in taverns, coffee houses, and markets. The prices rose fast, which raises the real question: did the market actually crash catastrophically? When historians dug into the actual records, court documents, transaction logs, notary papers, they found something surprising. There was no sudden economy-wide collapse, no mass bankruptcy, no social devastation. What they found instead was a market correction. Prices fell, some contracts went unfulfilled, some traders took losses, but it was localized, not systemic. The myth, the catastrophic crash that destroyed Holland, appears to have been invented or exaggerated decades later, mostly by writers and historians who were looking for a cautionary tale about greed. It fit a moral narrative perfectly, a nation brought low by vanity and irrational behavior. Except Holland's economy didn't collapse. In fact, the Dutch Golden Age continued for decades. So why does the false version persist? Because it's a better story, it's simpler, it fits into our existing beliefs about how markets work and how human psychology fails. A measured local market correction doesn't teach us much. A spectacular crash caused by flower-buying mania, that's memorable. That's a lesson we think we can apply. What actually happened was more subtle. Tulip bulbs had real value, they were rare, beautiful, and took years to cultivate. Wealthy people and merchants paid for that. A futures market developed. Prices got ahead of themselves, the market corrected. This happened in Holland while the country was experiencing genuine economic growth from shipping, finance, and trade. The real lesson isn't that ordinary people are irrational about flowers. It's that secondary markets, futures, derivatives, contracts on things not yet in hand, can create price volatility disconnected from actual supply and demand. That's a lesson that applied to tulips in 1637. It applied to railroad stocks in the 1890s. It applied to mortgages in 2008. But here's the part that gets lost in the myth: markets correcting isn't the same as economies collapsing. Holland didn't fall because tulip contracts got repriced. Holland thrived because it had real economic fundamentals: trade, finance, agriculture, innovation. The tulip market was a small, speculative corner of that larger picture. So when you see Tulip Mania cited as proof that markets are crazy or that ordinary people can't be trusted with money, remember, the story we tell about 1637 Holland is mostly fiction. The actual events were mundane by comparison. A market went up, a market came down, people adjusted, life continued. What that tells us is worth paying attention to. The stories we inherit about financial history are often simplified, often exaggerated, and often shaped more by what makes a good narrative than by what the actual records show. That matters when we're trying to understand how markets work today. The tulip market of 1637 wasn't a bubble that destroyed an economy. It was a speculative futures market that corrected itself, a small, localized event in a thriving nation. The real story of Holland's economy is the story of how it grew so wealthy in the first place: trade, finance, and innovation. That's less dramatic than flowers and financial ruin, but it's true. This video is for educational and informational purposes only and is not financial advice. Always do your own research. If you're curious about how historical financial stories get distorted and how myths shape the way we understand economics today, subscribe. There's a new historical bubble, crash, or misconception every week. Don't miss the next one. Subscribe, there's a new historical financial myth debunked every week. This video is for educational and informational purposes only and is not financial advice. Always do your own research.